So I'll qualify a snapshot of what I was like. It's been a long time since I've uh, had any alcohol in my system. But I do know that I'm definitely an alcoholic. Uh, I drank way more than my share when I was at a party. Um, I drank whatever there was, whatever somebody was willing to buy for me. Um, but that's not the only thing that made me an alcoholic. Uh, the other part of being an alcoholic for me was that I could not stand being in my own skin. And the alcohol helped me live with myself until it stopped working. But I had no idea what else to do, so I just kept drinking. And I am so forever grateful that I came to the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous and that I have stayed. And that should qualify me. Okay, so we have our 12 steps, and to read our 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, I have asked Terry T.
Okay, there. Did I come in? Yeah, I'm there. I'm an alcoholic member of the Port Whitby group. My name is Terry. Hi. My dry date is January the 6th, 1975. And I want you to know I've been sober all day and I just love it. I just love being sober. Anyways, here's the 12 steps of AA. 1, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. 2, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. 3, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. 4, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. 5, admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. 6, we're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. 7, humbly asked Him to remove our shortcomings. 8, made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. 9, made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. 10, continued to take personal inventory and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. 11, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood Him, praying only for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. And 12, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs. Thank you so much, Shauna. Enjoy the meeting, folks.
Thanks, Terry. And we also have our 12 traditions. And to read those, I have asked Sarah D.
Thank you. I'm Sarah D. I'm from Norman, Oklahoma, Solutions Group. Been sober since October 29, 2018. The 12 traditions. 1, our common welfare should come first. Personal recovery depends upon AA unity. 2, for our group purpose, there is but one ultimate authority, a loving God as He may express Himself in our group conscience. Our leaders are but trusted servants, they do not govern. 3, the only requirement for AA membership is a desire to stop drinking. 4, each group should be autonomous except matters affecting other groups or AA as a whole. 5, each group has but one primary purpose, to carry its message to the alcoholic who still suffers. 6, an AA group ought never endorse, finance, or lend the AA name to any related facility or outside enterprise, lest problems of money, property, and prestige divert us from our primary purpose. 7, every AA group ought to be fully self-supporting, declining outside contributions. 8, Alcoholics Anonymous should remain forever non-professional, but our service centers may employ special workers. 9, AA as such ought never be organized, but we may create service boards or committees directly responsible to those they serve. 10, Alcoholics Anonymous has no opinion on outside issues, hence the AA name ought never be drawn into public controversy. 11, our public relations policy is based on attraction rather than promotion. We need to always maintain personal anonymity at the level of press, radio, and films. 12, anonymity is the spiritual foundation of all of our traditions, ever reminding us to place principles before personalities.
Thanks, Sarah. Okay, just finding my spot again. I keep losing where I am, which is not uncommon for me. Our speaker today will share for approximately 1 hour. And our speaker comes to us tonight from India, originally from New York. The committee is pleased to introduce to you Roy T.
Hi, everybody. Thank you. Hold on a second. Let me get this. Okay, there we go. Hi, I'm an alcoholic. My name is Roy. And by the grace of a loving God who's come into my life through purely by me working the 12 steps, I haven't found it necessary to drink since the 22nd of April, 1990. And I'm grateful for that. And people in at least 4 other countries are grateful as well. So that's a good way for me to start the day. It's, I should have my head examined. And at the start of this meeting, I was talking to Dustin and Rob, and it's 5 a.m. Is it? Yeah, it's 5:30 a.m. now in India. And well, ever since this corona, I might as well get straight into my sex inventory, because ever since this coronavirus started, I've been marooned in bed with my 2 best friends, Netflix and Amazon Prime. So what was I going to do? I got an opportunity to do service, and I was taught to say yes if I wasn't doing something else like feeding my family. So I'm happy to be here. And of course, I'm going to go right back to bed after this. But that being the case, let's get straight into my story. Our stories do disclose in a general way what it used to be like, what happened, and what we are like here, what we are like now. And I'm going to try to the best of my ability to stick to that script. Now, when Shona introduced me, she said, Roy from India, was originally from New York. So that's a little bit of a mix-up, because I was originally from India and then from New York, and now I'm back in India. So I don't know whether I'm coming or going myself. Be that as it may. This is fun, because I was born in India in 59 years ago, and I come from mixed parentage. My dad's side of the family is Catholic, a lot of drinking there. My mom's side of the family is Hindu, a lot of drinking there too. Both of them are dental surgeons. My dad studied in Liverpool in the 50s. My mom studied at NYU. And so when I was a kid growing up, they entertained a lot. And every Saturday night, every Saturday night, you'd have this whole bunch of doctors and dentists over at our house singing Irish and Scottish songs around a piano. Now think about that. A bunch of Indian guys with nice Indian accents. Yes, let your minds wander free, singing Scottish and Irish songs around a piano. It was a riot. Now these parties did not resemble the kind of parties I went to. I mean, people had a couple of drinks, they sang, they danced, they had dinner, they had dessert, and they went on and they went home. There was no fisticuffs. The police were never called. Nobody was vomiting into the nearest potted plant. The entrees weren't accidentally fed to the dogs. Nobody lost their car keys. Everybody went home with the right spouse. This was normal drinking, you know. And if it wasn't at our house on Saturday night, it would be in somebody else's house. So this was my introduction to alcohol. My mom came from the Portuguese part of India. The rest of India was British, but she came from the Portuguese part. So it was customary to have wine with meals. And my dad's family's got some Scottish blood in them. I got most of the scotch. And so from the time I was a kid, we'd be given the occasional glass of wine or shandy on days and occasions of national importance. And when you grow up in India, and you look at the calendar with the Hindus, the Muslims, the Jews, the Christians, the Buddhists, the Sikhs, and several other religions which I might have forgotten, we have more religious holidays on our calendar than the Catholic calendar. So there were plenty of days and occasions, to have that glass of wine. Uh, and so, it wasn't frowned upon, it wasn't taboo. Never saw the only abnormality. My grandmother had this brother, and he would show up early for parties, and he would come to the back room where we kids were hanging out. And he would tell these most incredible stories about how he almost crashed his bike and squeaked by the cops, and incredible stories. They're wonderful. I mean, basically, he was sharing our stories. And we loved it. We said, wow, what an interesting life. And he would have this little bag over his shoulder. And ever so often, he'd raise this bag to his face and then he'd be all happy and jolly. And then he'd give us money to go to the store and get him peanuts or cigarettes and stuff like that. And I quickly figured out that if I loitered at the store long enough, he would forget that he gave me money, and he'd give me money all over again. So clearly I started on my criminal career long before I started on my alcoholic career. And but why I bring this uncle up, my granny's brother, is because he was kind and he was funny and he was loving and he was generous, and he told the most wonderful stories, and he was patient. He had time for us kids, and I wanted to be like him when I grew up. Needless to say, I got my wish. He did not make it into our rooms. He had an accident and hit his head on the curb coming home from work and died a few days later. And I still remember that I was about 18, and I had promised him that I would empty a bottle of booze on his grave after the funeral. And even while I was doing that, I was thinking to myself, what a waste. Would he really mind if I had it instead? But you know what? I did the right thing. I did buy a cheap bottle though. I didn't want to spend too much money. I mean, it's going to be poured out anyway. So, uh, so that's a little bit of the background. It was mostly social drinking, except for this one uncle. And, he could be counted on to do something spectacular, take a header into the cake, break a bottle of my dad's best scotch, try and do a headstand in the middle of the party. And then you wouldn't see this guy again for a month of Sundays. But I loved him. So that's the background to me growing up. Things changed when I was 16. I finished high school, and my father died. He had a heart attack when he was 48. And when you live in India in the 70s, there's no such thing as children's rights and stuff like that. You're basically living as a guest of your parents, and so you're bloody well going to do whatever they tell you to do, or else. And child abuse, or is that what they call it now? Anyway, they called it a good bit of discipline back in the day was not frowned upon. And so the committee decided in their wisdom that since we had this dental clinic and my dad was dead, I should go and become a dentist. I had no desire to spend my life looking into people's mouths. There are a couple of other interesting things that I found I could do with mouths over the years, and looking into them was not one of them. I wanted to be a travel agent. I wanted to be a history teacher. I wanted to be a social worker. I was in the Boy Scouts, so that was my love of travel, and that was my love of helping people. But you know what? When your mom's paying the bills, you do what you have to do. And off I went to college, and I hated every minute of it the first 1 week. I was doing stuff like physics and math, and I sucked at that. I was first acquainted with the grace of God in school, when somehow I would miraculously pass all these exotic subjects, even though I had no knowledge and no preparation for it. But a week after joining college, I met a number of people like me. They were disenchanted. They didn't really want to do what they were doing in college. And several of us had a social background of drinking. So we would get together and, as young men, we would start our weekend on Thursday night. And I have to say that uh, we did not limit our intake to alcohol. Uh, we would take whatever we could grab our hands on, whatever, liquid, powder, whatever, it didn't matter. But whatever we use, I can say now that I use very alcoholically. Now, this sort of affairs is not, it's really frowned upon by the educational committee. And after spending 3 years in college, they finally kicked me out. And I copped a real resentment. And I decided I was going to show them. And I started working in the travel and airline business. So I think I'd like to get to my first blackout because that was really the day after I finished high school. And the three of us had decided to go hiking into the mountains close to Bombay. And I don't know which bright spark it was, but someone said, hey, now that we're real men, let's get some of the real thing. Now, mind you, for 16 years, I'd been subjected to my grandmother's homemade wine, which was probably 95% grape juice, and shandy, which was like an inch of beer topped up with ginger ale or lemonade. And so we grabbed a couple of bottles of beer. We hiked up this mountain and, you know, opened the bottle, and I had the first swig. And I can vividly remember as I raised this bottle to my mouth, I'm thinking to myself, God, this smells disgusting. And as I tasted it, it tasted even worse going down. But I was a real man, so I wasn't going to let the other two guys know what I really thought. So I said, wow, this is great. And I passed the bottle. But by the time that bottle came back to me, something magical had happened. All of a sudden, my tiredness melted away. The breeze on the top of that mountain was refreshing. The view was spectacular. I felt great. This is wonderful. My entire persona had changed. And those two bottles were gone in no time flat, and I had developed a thirst. So I volunteered to climb back down the mountain, and I came back with a bottle of rum. And that started my first blackout, December 1977. Now, I did not drink blackout continuously, but that was my first blackout. I have no idea how I got home. I have no idea what happened. One of those two guys is still not talking to me, and that's 43 years later. And the other guy will not tell me what happened. So that's one blackout I'm not in a hurry to have catch up with me. Anyway, so I'm out of college, and now the drinking's changed. Because now that I'm working at the airport, now that I'm a real man, I've decided that I should drink like my dad. Because my father would come home from the clinic at 8 o'clock in the evening and pour himself a small drink and read the morning paper. And at 8:30, he'd pour a second drink, and then we'd sit down to dinner, and then he'd ask us kids how the day was like, and so on and so forth. 2 small drinks a day. So now that I'm a working man, I can drink. So the first thing that changed, I went from being a weekend warrior to a daily drinker. The second thing that changed was my finances started going down because now I'm spending money every day on booze. The third thing that changed was my relationship, because by that time I was engaged to be married to my girlfriend, or I was about to be engaged. And, I was occasionally expected to show up with flowers and, take her out to dinner, buy her something nice. And every time she raised the topic of when are we getting married, honey? Next year, honey, 10 years in a row is not really something that's going to bode well for a relationship. And so then we would start to have fights. And then I would discover these two magical properties that alcohol had. The first was temporary deafness because I could see her mouth moving, but I couldn't hear a damn thing. And the second was temporary amnesia because the next morning I didn't remember. And she said, you said this and you said that. And I denied it. I said, I never said anything of the sort. So she said, you should write that down. I'm the son of two dentists. Fancy me writing anything down that's legible, even to myself. The next thing that started to change was my quantity. The quantity started to go up. So I don't know on what date or on what occasion I went from 2 drinks to 2 large drinks, and from 2 large ones to, 4 to 6 to whatever I could stand. I have no idea. It just crept up on me slowly, imperceptibly. And this started to have an effect on my health because now I started to wake up hungover and sometimes, hair of the dog or, I could identify a lot with our co-founder, Dr. Bob, because on page 178 of the big book in his story, Dr. Bob really, he wrote my story. He talked about waking up and so sick that he would fill himself up with pills and so that he could get to work and make enough money to buy enough booze to drink again. And that was me. I would either drink before I went to work, or I would use some other exotic substance so I could be steady enough to go to work. Now I worked at the airport. I also worked in cargo, and in cargo we also handle baggage. And when you're really, you know, not 100% at 6 a.m. and that bag comes down the ramp and you can't really read whether the label says Vancouver or whether it says Vladivostok. You're lucky if that bag lands up in Addis Ababa. So if anybody at this group has ever lost a bag on Swiss Air, TWA, Pan Am, Kuwait Airways, Gulf Air, Ethiopian, uh, it was probably me or one of my alcoholic buddies. So public amends. And I have since learned when I travel, I only take carry-on baggage because whatever I need, I can just buy when I land over there inside a trip. So when you land up that, I would land to work hungover and I would grab a file and I'd be walking from one end of Bombay airport to the other, looking for a lost bag or a lost cow or a lost child or something of the sort. And bosses don't like that kind of behavior, and they start giving you these little love letters, memos, who says, listen, get your act together, buddy, or you're going to need to go and find some other place to work at. And so that's why I jumped through so many jobs. And then one night I was playing pool with a couple of friends of mine that were filmmakers. And at 2 o'clock in the morning, I don't know whose bright idea it was for me to call my boss and quit my airline job and start working in the film and television industry, of which I didn't have a clue. So I showed up the next morning in my friend's office and I said, hey, I'm here for work. He said, what? They didn't remember hiring me either. My health took a turn for the worse. I had an enlarged liver by the time I was 26. And by the time I was 28, we were shooting a TV serial here in Goa, actually, December 1989. And I had been abusing alcohol and other substances from about 6 o'clock in the morning. And I can honestly say that I have no idea what happened. I was with these 2 girls from Ireland who were visiting India. And I got on my motorbike and they said, Roy, you're in no condition to ride. And I said, dude, in your country, if you drink, you can't ride. In my country, if you don't drink, you can't ride. That's the last thing I remember. 7 days later, I woke up in hospital. I'd been in a coma. I'd gone off a cliff, fallen 20 feet. Like any good biker, I didn't have my helmet on. And I had 36 stitches in my head, 8 compressed vertebrae in my neck in a collar, back in a brace, tubes sticking out all of me. And of course, I woke up with all the alcoholic symptoms, shame and fear and guilt and remorse. And, there's a whole committee sitting there. And the first question they asked me was, what happened? And I don't know about you guys, but my MO is to lie first, watch their faces very closely. And if the lie sticks, I'm going with that. So when they said what happened, I said, listen, this is India. I said, there was a cow crossing the road and I swerved to avoid the cow. It wasn't my fault. I was going straight. The road turned left. And, I don't even think they bought it, but that was my story. I was sticking to it. And a couple of days later, I was totally restless, irritable, discontent. And my mind said, go have a drink, you'll feel better. And I took a discharge against medical advice. I walked out of that hospital into the nearest bar, had a couple of drinks, and rented another motorcycle. Of course, I didn't need a helmet this time because I had this big bandage on my head. And I wrote back to the film unit and they said, you're crazy, bro. You can't be over here. They packed me up, they sent me back to Bombay, and I spent the next 3 months in bed. That's what it used to be like. In the course of these years from 1978, 76, when I finished school, till 1990, when I got sober, this is what happened to me. And, I was like that guy on page 31 of the big book, switching from scotch to brandy, switching from alcohol to other drugs, changing girlfriends, changing jobs, swearing off, swearing on. I once took a job in a country where alcohol was taboo. I lasted a week and I came back to India. I mean, insanity. I didn't really want to quit drinking. I just wanted to show people that I was making the attempt. So that's really what it used to be like. What happened? What happened was Alcoholics Anonymous happened to me. My first run-in with Alcoholics Anonymous was in 1978. I was 18 years old. I was having occasional blackouts. I was starting to have demonstrate irresponsible behaviors. And I was reading a book called The Second Deadly Sin about a New York City detective who was chasing the ice pick killer. And this detective is in AA and he's having a slip. And they're talking about AA. And, I filed that information away. I said, great. There's a place where I can send all my buddies when they develop drinking problems. And, I didn't think I would need it myself. I kept drinking, blacking out, having problems, as I said. And in 1984, I was 22 years old and I was 12-step by my grandmother. So I told you about this one brother that my grandmother had. She had another brother, and this guy had got sober in India in 1957. He was AA number 4 in India. I had no clue. So she of course knew everything about this. She saw the signs and symptoms. I'm coming home from a night shift at the airport and having 3 large drinks before I go to sleep. And she said, listen, you got a drinking problem. You need to go and meet Uncle Tony and his friends who don't drink. Listen, Uncle Tony plays the violin. Not I got anything against violinists, but plays the violin, sings Ave Maria in Latin. And when you're freaking 22 years old and you're listening to, Pink Floyd, and you're really not into Uncle Tony and Ave Maria and the violin either, and his friends who don't drink. But if you love your grandmother as much as I do, you have a couple of drinks and you go off to your first AA meeting. It was more than a couple of drinks because I don't know what happened at that meeting, but I recently met somebody who was at that first meeting with me. And he said after the meeting, both of us went out and got drunk, and I continued to drink for another 6 years. He drank for another 16 years, I think. We're both sober now. And when I walked to this meeting, I wasn't completely drunk, but I was 22 and I'm 59 now. But everyone at that meeting was, they were well into a respectable age group bracket, These are guys who had children my age. And all I wanted to do was find a nice girl on a Friday night and, go out for a movie and whatever else that led to. And these guys were talking about savings, college funds and savings account and retirement. And I had nothing in common with them. They were old, they had lost jobs, they had been divorced, they'd be, the regular rock bottom stuff, which I had, I sneered. I looked down at my nose at them. I was definitely better than them. I had a strong better than syndrome at that time. And so I said, you know what, thanks a lot. This is not for me. Now, at that time, I discovered that there were two types of people in AA. You had this group of people whom I call the directors. I did not like them. These were the kind of guys who said, you need to start doing the steps as soon as the vomit dries. You need to get a sponsor. Bill W did the steps in 3 days. Dr. Bob did them in 3 weeks. None of this 90-day nonsense. Get with the program, blah, 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 blah. I said, this sounds like too much of work. And I wasn't even sure I wanted to stop drinking. Then I found this other group of people called the suggesters. Here are people after my own heart. First suggestion they gave me was, put the plug in the jug. I said, that's great, man. I put the plug in the jug every Monday. It came out every Friday night. So that suggestion didn't work. Then they said, don't drink and go to meetings. That did not make sense. Because if I had the power to don't drink, why would I need to go for these bloody meetings, Then there was this other wonderful slogan. It said, remember your last drunk? I said, yeah, man, that was so much fun. We went here, we got wasted. They said, you're not supposed to remember the fun. You said, remember your last drunk. Then they would say, you're exactly where you're supposed to be. I said, what sort of malarkey is that? I'm supposed to be almost alcoholic, almost unemployed, almost unengaged, almost in jail, almost without a driving license. And the other thing that I had against this whole AA was that every time, and I would go for meetings every 3 or 4 months. I'd go for 2 or 3 meetings. But every time I went for these meetings, they would start off with this bloody prayer. They would bring in that horrible 3-letter word, G-O-D. And then every Johnny that stood up, I'm sober today by the grace of God, God this, God that, higher power, please. Now I came from 2 different religions. Like I said, my dad's family is Catholic, my mother's family is Hindu. Depending which grandmother I was visiting, I was assured that the other half was the wrong kind and going to a warm place. So that grounding wasn't good. Compounding my misery, then when my dad died, the priest who said the funeral mass for him, the guy sexually assaulted me that night, the night of my dad's funeral. So give me a break. I'm going for meetings in churches. You guys are praying. And all I want to do is try to figure out if I got a drinking problem. And if I do, give me a solution. I'm the son of 2 dentists. There has to be a medical solution for this. And then they would point out to these steps, and I looked at the steps and they completely did not make sense to me, because I looked at step 1 and I said, okay, powerless and unmanageability, I have to admit it, because I was 28 years old, I was broke, I was unemployed, I was single, I had less than $3 American in the bank, and I was sleeping on my grandmother's couch. So I got step 1. Step 2, they talked about a higher power. I had walked away from God, so I didn't need step 2. Step 3 had God, that was gone. Step 4, I really didn't think there was anything wrong with me. I was busy taking the inventory of the whole world. I had a long list of blame that I could fling at people, and I did. So I didn't need step 4. There was no way I was going to tell you guys the truth about me. So step 5 is out. My entire character was defective, but there was no way I was going to admit that to anybody. So 6 and 7 was out. I could use some kind of a modified step 8 and 9. I had a long list of people that I wanted to harm. And I had an even longer list of people that owed me amends. So that I could do some work with. 10, again, there's nothing wrong with me. So 10's out. 11 is prayer and meditation. That is out. And 12 says, come for meetings, basically. So the directors, they were out. And the suggesters were great. Make 90 meetings in 90 days. Why? They didn't really tell me why, but they said, well, we all do it, so you should do it. And what happens after 90 days? Well, you start over again. Why? What will happen? Because you'll make a lot of meetings. And then what? Meeting makers will make it. What is this it that the meeting makers make? I'm really not sure what the it is that they made, but there was no way I was going to be making meetings, working at an airport or working for a film crew. In those days in India, you just one meeting a day in the night. So like, you know, uh, and there was a whole host of things, but I tried the suggestions. Finally, in 1990, when I came back, my last relapse was on the 22nd of April, 1990. And it was really, it wasn't a good relapse. It was a good last drink. Uh, I was 3 weeks sober in AA, and I was with some friends up on top of a mountain. God has a sense of humor. My first blackout was on top of a mountain, and my last drink was on top of a mountain. And they said, "What are you drinking?" Now I was too ashamed and embarrassed to say that as a 28-year-old, I'm 3 weeks sober in Alcoholics Anonymous, that I have a disease that's killing me. And I said, I'm not drinking. I mean, they were shocked. What do you mean you're not drinking? So I said, okay, what do you got? And they had a couple of shots of whiskey. Now, I'm not a whiskey drinker. I've been a rum drinker all my life, but I've never discriminated against any form of alcohol. I've given all of them a fair shake. So I said, I'll have the whiskey. So I had the two whiskeys. These three lightweights had killed half a bottle of wine, and they were putting the bottle away. I mean, what kind of madness is that? I still get annoyed when I take flights at people who sit and stir their bloody drink for 10 minutes before they even take the first sip. That's alcohol abuse, if you ask me. So anyway, I grabbed this bottle of wine. I had my two whiskeys, half a bottle of wine. I did not get drunk. We had a great time. We sang songs, played guitars around the campfire. The next morning, hiking down to the railhead to take the train back to Bombay, one sec, just checking the time. I kept asking myself, why did you pick up that drink? And for the first time, I qualified myself. Page 30 of the big book says, we admitted to our innermost selves that they were alcoholic. I hadn't done that. I used to come for meetings like a jackass. Hi, I'm Roy, I'm an alcoholic, not even knowing what the heck that meant. And page 44 says, if when we honestly want to, we can't quit. Or if while drinking, we can't control. And I said, man, that's me. I did not want to drink. I had no intention of drinking. I succumbed. I did not have the mental power to say no. I planned to have only two whiskeys and I had the wine. I said, I'm completely mentally and physically powerless over alcohol. What is the unmanageability part? And I was told that the unmanageability is the 8 bedevilments on page 52. And I looked at and when I went for that meeting on 23rd of April, 1990, I was maybe 17 or 18 hours sober. And I met a guy who was sober the same year as Terry, 1975, my first sponsor. And this guy destroyed my last argument for being in AA because he got sober at the age of 20. And when I met him, he was 16 years sober. And I had been monkeying around from age 22 to age 28. So I'm too young, you're too old. Finished. I had no argument anymore. So I looked at those 8 questions. Am I having trouble with personal relationships? I had no personal relationships with anybody. I even had trouble with a relationship with myself. I hated myself. Can I control my emotional natures? You can't go around punching people and stabbing people and, trying to be free. So I would, every time I got really pissed, I'd go down and I'd kick the back of my car. And I put a lot of dents into it. And every Monday morning, the mechanic would say, what the hell did you do to this car, man? And when you're sober, you can't really tell him, listen, man, I've been kicking my own car. So, prey to misery and depression. Sure, 28, broke, unemployed, single, living on a grandmother's couch, no money. Yes, I was miserable and depressed. Couldn't make a living. Duh, I couldn't. We were unhappy. Sure, I was. We were full of fear. Oh my God, how am I going to live without booze? How am I going to live? Could I be of real help to other people? And that was the unkindest cut of all, because I had been in the Boy Scouts from the time I was a little boy. I was a scoutmaster. I'd helped so many people, try. I was in the helping profession, and I could not be of real help to other people, And I said, if I answer those 8 questions today, 30 years sober, I still answer yes to several of them. Personal relationships, I'm okay now. emotional nature. For the most part, I'm not kicking my car anymore. I'm able to pray and take care of that. Misery and depression. I'm stuck in India. The country is locked down. My 18-year-old son is in Pennsylvania. He just graduated high school. I can't be there for that. You know, so it is. That's, God doesn't do anything by mistake. Couldn't make a living. I returned to India to start an alcohol rehab 2 years ago, and we were empty for the last 2 months. I had to close shop on June 30th. So yes, fear of economic insecurity had left me, but it's back again. Yes, you know. Um, Am I unhappy? I'm not miserable, but yeah, I'm a little sad that, but thanks to Zoom and WhatsApp and all these I got sober BC, before computers. Now I can talk to my son every day on WhatsApp, and that's pretty cool. So I'm grateful for that. And, am I full of fear? I'm not full of fear, but there is some apprehension. And am I able to help other people? Absolutely. Do I feel useless? Absolutely not. So what I mean to say is that I haven't yet read in the big book where my life is ever going to be manageable again by me. And just 30 years sober, answering so many of these questions reinforces for me the need for a new manager in my life, which brings me to step two. Now I had all this bloody religious baggage, and I came to AA, and this guy, my sponsor, he said, "Look, kid," and I hated the fact that he was only 8 years older than me and called me kid. You're 16 years sober. So he says, "Look, kid, A is about two things. It's about God and it's about booze. The booze is going to kill you and God's going to save you. So if you're not willing to open your mind to a power greater than yourself, I cannot be your sponsor. Find some other idiot." So that's when you get another tribe in AA. They're called nonsers. You take out the SP and put an N in front. These are guys who are probably hard drunks who wandered into AA, never found the need to do anything other than step 1 and 12, never did a fourth step. They are their own God. They make their own decisions. These are the guys who will give you copious advice on how to take several of the steps which they haven't taken themselves. So I love these nonsense. I mean, it didn't keep me sober, but I sounded good. I could spout some good jargon. None of it really worked. And he said, "You can find one of those guys." And I said, "No, I'm willing to do anything." So he asked me a simple question. I did not know he's quoting page 46 of the big book. He said, "Do you have any friends left?" How am I doing on time? 15 minutes. He said, "Do you have any friends left?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "What's so good about them?" I said, "Well, they forgive all my crap. They bail me out. They lend me money. They hook me up. They look for jobs. And in the days when I was religious, didn't I pray to God for all those things? Please give me this job, give me money, give me this girl, give me, yeah. And my friends are doing that. So he said, write down all these qualities of your friend and let me ask you a simple question. If there actually was a God in this universe, wouldn't you like God to have those qualities? I said, you bet. He said, that's all AA says. He said, willing to believe in a power greater than yourself, whatever your concept may be. I've had no problem with my concept of anything. So I had no problem with my concept of God, and that's what page 47 says. When therefore we speak to you of God, we mean your concept of God. So I was willing to admit there was a power greater than myself. Boom, step 2 done. And this is like 10 minutes after the meeting ended. And then we came to step 3, and he said, "Are you willing to do anything we ask you to do?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Good, you've done step 3. He said, "Let me break it down for you." He said, "You don't believe in God, but here's a group of drunks." He said, "Roy, let me ask you, in those 6 years that you wandered in and out of AA, every time you relapsed and came back, what about us?" I said, "You guys were all sitting there annoyingly sober. None of you had relapsed." So he said, "Can you admit that at least where alcohol is concerned, we are a power greater than you?" I couldn't argue. Group of drunks, good orderly direction, get out of debt, go out dancing, whatever it is. I said, I'm in. Step 3 done. I said, okay, so now I get the 90-day break. He said, no, now you start writing step 4. I wasn't even 24 hours sober. I had my last drink on the 22nd, probably at 11 o'clock at night. And I'm talking to this guy the next day at 9 o'clock in the evening. And we crossed the road. We bought a 200-page notebook, and he made me start writing my 4th step. I said, listen, I was told you got to wait like at least 3 or 4 years before you do your fourth step. And he said, nonsense. He said, the program says you do this at once. I said, oh, but you know what? He said, Roy, the fourth step is really simple, and you've already done most of your fourth step. I said, when did I do that? He said, in the bar, you jackass. He said, every time you went to the bar, after 2 or 3 drinks, all your resentments came out. My boss is like that, my girlfriend's like this. I said, that's right. He said, the big book asks you to look at resentments. Whom are you pissed off at? Let me tell you, when you're 1 day sober and the vomit hasn't dried, all those people you're resentful at, it's a nice, healthy list. The moment you wait 2, 3 months, the list dwindles and diminishes. I'm glad I had this guy. He said, what about fears? He said, after 2 or 3 more drinks, all your fears come out. Oh my God, what is my boss going to say? What's my girlfriend going to say? I said, you're right, man. He said, after 2 or 3 more drinks, then all your sexual conduct comes to the fore. Fortunately, you've been drinking so much, all the other girls can just walk away from you. They don't even need to run because you can't even walk in a straight line. I said, holy cow. He said, yep. And the people you harmed, that's the only thing I never really talked about. I never talked about bringing home disreputable characters at 2 in the morning, waking up my grandmother, demanding food. I never talked about the pain and misery I caused that poor woman, me leaving home, her never knowing whether her eldest grandchild will ever come home alive or not, the nervousness, the anxiety, the depression. That I never talked about. All AA says is write it down. And I sat down and I did it. I did my fourth step. Now, I'm not like some of the young guys nowadays who finish their fourth step in 3 or 4 days. I would goof off from Monday to Saturday. And on a Saturday night, I'd do some desperate writing because I'd meet my sponsor the next day. And once that was done, my sponsor came over to my house and we did step 5. And we didn't waste any time. He didn't have a phone, so I had to take 2 buses to get to his place. And he came over, he went through my fourth step, and he had a little paper in his hand and he was making notes. And it was a little disconcerting because he kept raising his eyebrows and making sounds and faces. He'd be reading my fourth step. Oh, ooh, very bad, very bad. Oh my God. And then make some notes. What the heck's going on over here? And when this was done, he said, anything else? I said, no. He said, what about all that sexual stuff and criminal stuff that you did not write? I said, like what? And then he came to my rescue and he shared some of his own stuff. And you know what? It was comforting to know that someone else had been where I had been and had done what I had done. And then I was able to share my stuff with him. And he said, you're done. I said, now what? He said, now you sit down quietly for 1 hour and just review what you've done, which I did. And then he gave me this piece of paper. And on one side was a list of all my character defects, which he had picked out from my fourth step. There were 17 character defects. He said, do you want to hold on to any of these? So I said, yeah, I think I'll keep lust. That's a helpful one when you're 28. I think I'll keep manipulation because I think I'll keep laziness. So he said, good. All the rest you're willing to let go of? I said, yeah. So he said, here's a new prayer. If there is a God, please remove the defects that I don't want, that I want to keep. And if there is a God, please remove the other defects so that I can help other people. He said, good, you're done with step 6 and 7. And then he flipped the page over and there was a whole list of amends that he had written. I'm just sharing my experience. This is how I did it with him. And he gave me this whole list of amends, which he had picked out from my story. And we just went straight down that list. Step 8. He said, which of these amends can you make right now? I said, I can make amends to my brother. I can make amends to my neighbors. I can make amends to my dogs. I can make amends to the cigarette vendor whose store was across the street. He said, good, let's start those right away. Which of these would you have to do a little later? I said, my grandmother's now living in Australia. My sister's in San Francisco, Vancouver. I'm not sure which. I'd have my cousin in England, somebody else in Singapore. I'm going to need to save some money to buy a ticket to go and make those amends. I owe money to the film company who picked up the whole tab from my motorcycle accident. He said, okay, we'll do those a little later. He said, any that you're not sure about? I said, yeah, there are some I'm not too sure because like I said, I worked at the airport and I worked in cargo, and I didn't have a spotless record, and that's all I'm going to say publicly. And making some of those amends might have jeopardized my freedom. So I wasn't really sure about those. He said, okay, we'll put them in not sure. And he put these little notations on the list. Right now, L for later, NS for not sure. And there was some that I couldn't make. I couldn't walk up to some dude and say, hey, sorry, I've been with your wife for the last 3 years, he said, great, let's get started. And he came with me to supervise my first 2 amends, you know. And then, he showed me the rudiments of doing step 10. He said, step 10 is not something you do at night. He said, a lot of rehabs in India or other parts of the world that teach people that step 10 is something you do at night. It's not, it's something that you do through the day. It's a continuous process. And by the way, you do step 10 as you're starting step 9. You don't wait to finish step 9. And 11, listen, just because I'm from India and prayer and meditation, don't think I'm going to go into the half lotus position and my legs wrapped around my head, nothing. I just follow the big book rigidly. At night, I do my review, I ask those 10 questions, and then I go to sleep. In the morning when I wake up, I'm awake, but I'm going back to sleep, so I haven't done my 11th step yet. I ask God to, take care of my thinking, and I make my plans for the day. That's my meditation. And then I pray and ask for the strength to do the right thing. And then step 12, to do whatever needs to be done. That was my steps. I did them in about 2 months. I never drank again. 1 year later, I was ready to kill myself because we had no big books in India in 1990. So I just did it the way my sponsor told me to do it. And by the grace of God, when I was 1 year sober, my sister sent me a big book from San Francisco. And my aunt in Australia sent me some speaker tapes of these 2 American guys who were talking about their experience of doing the steps as described in the big book. Totally changed my world, rocked my world, man. Totally rocked my world. And then I always say I stopped drinking in 1990, but I recovered from my alcoholism in 1991. I did the steps again. I'm completely recovered. I've not had an obsession to drink for over 29 and a half years. I'm sober 30 years. I'll always have this allergy. I'll always be unmanageable. So I always need step 1. So once this was done, I got my job back in the film business. The proof of AA was my bosses saying, hey, do you have any other sober alcoholics who want to work in the film business? And I was able to hook people up. And I mean, that is the gift that AA gives us. AA gives me the steps to change my life and be an example that other people will say, we want more of you, man. Let's get some more people in here. And I was 3 years sober in 1993. We were doing a documentary film for UNICEF. There was another epidemic in those days, malaria. I almost died. And I was in hospital and I had my road to Damascus moment. And I said, what am I doing with my life? I'm 31 years old. I've recovered. I speak 3 languages. I have excellent communication skills. I love working with alcoholics and addicts. I'd been volunteering at Mother Teresa's home for dying destitutes. The nuns would call me when an alcoholic was brought in off the street and just go and hang with the guy for a couple of hours till he died. I decided I want to be a professional. There were no schools for addiction counseling in India, so I turned it over. By this time, I did come to believe. I went from willing to coming to believe. And today I call myself a USB, a universal spiritual believer, because I can plug into any good value group and I take. I'm still a taker when it comes to spirituality. And God in his wisdom and mercy sent me off to a Middle Eastern country where alcohol was taboo. And there was another guy there who was 5 years sober. The 2 of us started the first AA meeting in that country. What a blessing. We used to drive the US embassy crazy because we'd call them up, hey, any American ships in port? Sir, that's classified information. No, there's sailors on that ship that need a meeting. Sir, that's still classified information. So we would talk to the taxi drivers and we would talk to the ladies of the night. And then Mark and I would go down to the port with this sign, any friends of Bill W., and we'd pick up some hapless sailors and take them off to our meeting. And the 2 of us were the meeting. These poor guys have been on a ship for 6 months thinking they're going to the meeting, and they get the two of us. You know, a spiritual experience was in 2003. I was speaking at the Hicksville Group's 50th anniversary. And after the meeting, a guy came up to me with tears flowing down his face. And he said, dude, I'm one of those sailors you picked up in Sharjah in 1996. I was 3 months sober then. I'm sick. I mean, my hair's standing now. I'm tearing up. That's a spiritual experience. You know, I haven't had the bells and whistles. So, and then a year later, God sent me to the United States. I went back to school at age 36. I qualified as a substance abuse counselor. I was director of 3 different rehabs in New York. I got married to somebody in recovery. So I got sober in India. This young lady got sober in Mexico. We met on a bus trip going to Dr. Bob's house in Akron, Ohio. I was 6 years sober. She was 4 years sober. Great idea. Let's get married. So we got married. We are no longer married, but we both have higher powers. They're called lawyers. And I got to tell you, the kitty box that goes around the lawyers' rooms, shoo, much heavier than the kitty box that goes around AA. We have an 18-year-old son that's actually is very amicable. I'm kidding. She's sober and so am I. We've both done the big book, and you know it's an amicable divorce. It just didn't work out. And we have an 18-year-old son who's not seen either of us drink or drug, and you know it's a joy. My son, when he was in 5th grade, came to me and said, "Dad, you need to talk to my class teacher. I think she's got a problem. She smells funny. She forgets what she's saying. She goes to the bathroom and doesn't come back. Handshake. I mean, this kid has been going for AA meetings from the time he was in a stroller. So they'd have their own little a la tot meeting at the back with the headphones and, you know, DVD players. But I was so proud of that. And so 3 years ago, in 2016, I got laid off from the outpatient I was at. They were having a cash crunch. And I had to come back to India. My mom needed open heart surgery. And I met up with some of my buddies from India. And using the choicest expletives, which I will not repeat in a spiritual meeting, they said, "You son of a gun." Gun was not actually the word they used. They said, "You went to America and you said you're going to qualify as a counselor and you're going to come back and you're going to start a rehab. And what are you doing there?" Now, my son had turned 16 and he decided he wants to join the US Air Force. So he went off to a military school in Virginia. And as soon as he did that, we signed the divorce, sold the house, and I said, you know, why not? So I turned it over, did a third step, and I went to India. And I said, God, if it be your will, you make this happen. I had fun for the last 3 years at a small little place where we did some of the technical rehab stuff, you know, showed the right movies and distributed the right worksheets to keep the authorities happy. But basically just got these guys into the big book and got them through the steps and had so much fun watching people recover. And God in His wisdom and mercy decided that I needed to do something else. So I sat empty for 2 months, couldn't carry the overhead anymore. So I closed doors on June 30th and I relocated to Goa. And the moment I relocated to Goa, 2 people said, "Hey, we'd like to come to you." So I got outpatient. I got a beautiful house. The ocean is across where I live. It's a gated community with 20 apartments. There's only 2 of us here. Everybody is locked down in different parts of the world. So I got these 2 people that come every morning, and you know, I'm able to help them. I get to attend more meetings now than I had when I was working in a rehab, and I'm eternally grateful that when the first 100 people figured out how this was done, they didn't keep it to themselves. They put it down on paper and they said that all over the world. Look at the results. 50 million copies of the big book, 183 countries, 125,000 meetings, 77 languages, 2.2 million people going for meetings every day before this lockdown occurred. Even I think AA were the first people to start this whole Zoom meeting revolution before even if the corporates got into it. All of us were like, "Hey, dude, let's start a meeting." And it's been such a joy and it's been such a blessing. I'm almost out of time. It is Oh, yeah, past time. It's 9:04 Eastern Standard Time. So with your indulgence, I'll just speak for 3 or 4 minutes more. Um, how do I practice my 12 steps today? When I wake up in the morning, which I will do in a couple of hours after I go back to bed. So this is my what I do. This is my program. No, it's my practice of the program. There is no my program. There's only the program. This is how I practice it. When I wake up in the morning, before I even get my lazy backside out of bed, God, please keep me sober today. Okay? By me saying, God, please keep me sober, that's step 1 and 2. I'm admitting in that simple statement that I'm as powerless today as I was 30 years ago. And by saying, please keep me, God, please keep me sober, I'm acknowledging that I need a power greater than myself to do the job, as on page 45. Because if I could do the job, I don't need you guys. I just do the job. And then I do a step 2 and I said, okay, God, please keep me sane today and, let me not make the usual mistakes. And then I do my version of step 3 because Big Book says the wording is quite optional. And I said, God, money, power, fame, and sex, my instincts, please take them and give them to me in the quantities I need, and take away my difficulties. That's my favorite one. Money problems, girl problems, health problems. Take those away so that I can help other people. Then I do a prevention step 4. I say, God, I'm sure I'm going to resent some jackass today. Please give that son of a gun everything I want for myself. Good health, long life, sobriety, serenity, fat bank balance, fast cars, hot chicks, happy family, splendid relationship, not necessarily in that order. Then I do a step 7. Please take my defects and do what you want with them. And then I get out of bed, go for my shower, have my coffee, do whatever I need to do. And it's after that that I sit down for a quiet time. I gotta confess, I don't always read the daily reflections. I really don't like it. I like the literature part of it. I really don't get much. A lot of the sharings that are shared over there, this is just me. I do not, in my experience, I do not get a lot from the majority of the pages of the daily reflections. I got sober 12 on the 24 hours a day book. I still love the first reading of the day. I read some other stuff. I read some spiritual literature, and then I sit down and I do my quiet time, and that's what I do. So, I hope God gives me work for as long as I live, and lets me live for as long as I work. And ever since I've stopped doing God's job, there's plenty of work helping other people. I came here to Goa. There were 4 people in my gated community. One was a 79-year-old guy who had been starving for 1 month. He'd been living off water. So not an alcoholic. And 77 says maximum service to God and the people. I was able to get him admitted to hospital, so I visit the block every day. The other was a British fellow who got marooned, and the poor guy had a psychotic break. He's actually one of us, has a compromised liver, but he was dry drunk. So I had Big Book says you got to send for the police and ambulance. I sent for both. Got him put into the psych ward. Call the bloody British High Commission. We're trying to get the guy repatriated to England. We got to do this. It's not only about helping alcoholics. I'm way over time. I'm really sorry for speaking so long. I apologize, and thank you so much for being so patient and not cutting me off. Thank you, and good night to all of you, and God bless you. Thank you for my sobriety.
Thank you, Roy.
Thanks, Roy. I was able to identify with a lot of what you talked about. That first drink or the alcohol just made everything so much better. The world was much better. And of course, looking back, I realized, oh no, it didn't change the world. It just changed my perception of it, which is now what the steps and traditions and concepts do for me, which is great. Excuse me. You talked about how some of the issues, they still come back. Some of that unmanageability still comes back, and I can identify with that. I'm sure it happens for a lot of us. It comes back, but it's a constant reminder that, I'm not perfect. these things are going to happen, and it's just because I got sober doesn't mean I'm immune from life on life's terms. Life is going to happen, but now I have the tools to deal with it when I am not doing well. Like I said, I got a lot out of what you said. The comments are coming in as well. You were able to reach a lot of people. Thank you so much for your message and spending time with us this evening. Now, before we unmute everyone, let's see. Let me stick to the script. I've asked somebody to volunteer to read an excerpt from A Vision for You, and that is Eric S.
Alcoholic Eric. Abandon yourself to God as you understand God. Admit your faults to Him and to your fellows. Clear away the wreckage of your past. Give freely of what you find and join us. We shall be with you in the fellowship of the Spirit, and you will surely meet some of us as you trudge the road of happy destiny. May God bless you and keep you until then. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. All right, so everyone is aware that the chat is up and running again, so you can put comments in there. We also are asking people to contribute to the 7th tradition at aa.org. So it's the AA General Service Office. We do have our anonymity. Anonymity is the spiritual foundation of all our traditions. Please respect this and treat in confidence who you saw here and what you hear here. All right, and thank you everyone for coming and joining us tonight for our Saturday night speaker series, and you can unmute everybody.
Right, Roy, thank you so much. Great talk, man. Excellent. You get a good sleep.
Thank you, Roy.
Thanks,
Thank
Roy.
you so much.
Thank you, Roy. Wonderful.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Roy.
Enjoyed the meeting.
Thank you, Roy.
Thanks, Roy.
See you guys soon and hope not at this time.
Good night. Good night, Roy.
Thank you, Roy.
Thank you so much,
Thank you, Roy.
Roy.
Thank you, Roy. I enjoyed it. Got a lot out of it. I identified, and I gotta go to bed and go to sleep or I'll fall down. Fall down sober now.
That was really wonderful. Thank you, Roy.
Thank you guys for the meeting.
Thank you, guys.
Have a good night.
Thank you.